Hello, you guys. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Outside the Box with me, Sage the Coach. I am a certified life and relationship coach from a Christian basis, is what I coach from. And here we have just one moment. Tamisa is joining in. So tonight I had a show earlier today that I did with Pastor Dr. Reverend James Tan, and we talked about his book, Releasing the Miraculous. And in that video, in that interview tonight, I mentioned about the show tonight, which we'll be talking about a little bit heavier of a topic, which is racism in the church. And so tonight for our conversation, we have Tamisa Johnson, Peter Benedict, David Hazer, and Tim and Misty. And if you guys just want to briefly kind of introduce yourselves, you can go ahead and start doing that now while I also share this stream in other places. So while other people are introducing themselves, if you guys have someone else that you want to share this stream at, you can do that while people are kind of introducing themselves. So I see Tim and Misty first. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we'll finish going around. We'll get started on this conversation.
Hi, my name is Tim Van Vorst, and I'm joining this conversation because it's of interest to me. I grew up in a really conservative church and didn't recognize up until fairly recent that it was very exclusive church and just not recognized completely the amount of racism that was present in the church. And with recent murder of George Floyd, I've had a lot of struggles in identifying the church that I may feel at home and comfortable going to that supports not only my beliefs, but how I feel about the community in general.
Okay.
So is my husband. We went to the same church when we first got married. So
Okay, Misty, hold on one second. You guys, can you mute yourselves if you're not talking? If you're not talking, just so we kind of cut out on the background noise. Tamisa's muted, okay, and David's muted, and I'm gonna mute myself, so you guys can go ahead.
okay. Hi, I'm Misty. This is my husband Tim. He just kind of introduced himself. We obviously went to the same church for a number of years. As being the only Black person at that church, experienced a lot of racism, a lot of hatred, a lot of what I would call spiritual abuse, being told that God only accepts a certain color of people, a certain kind of people. So really just struggling with faith. We moved up here we moved from South Dakota to Minnesota in 2015. So really trying to find footing in a new church and feeling comfortable. After the murder of George Floyd, there's just another layer in our current church or the churches that we have gone to recently that really is hard for me as a biracial female, especially one who looks more Black, and recognizing that racism still exists in the church, even churches that don't have that same cultish feel to them.
You got to unmute Sage.
I should know that I have to unmute myself to talk, but So anyway, David, go ahead. You're up next.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is David Hazer. I'm associate pastor at Agape Family Faith Center. My wife and I, we serve there. Our lead pastor is Pastor Arthur Clark and his wife, Charmaine Clark. And, out the gate, one reason I'm engaging in is because I know that this issue of racism permeates not just the church, but our nation. And not just the nation, but the world. So I think it's important that, especially the church, we talk about it at least. We need to engage it. We're not in the church 24/7, but we are in our community. So we engage these same people who go to our churches or go out in our community and abroad. And so I think it's just something that we got to continue to talk about and engage until we find a solution. So I'm all about finding a solution, participating in anything that I can do to help find that solution.
Good. Okay, Peter, you're up.
Yeah, I really love everything David just said. I think the problem of racism permeates our whole culture, and it's probably easier as a pastor or people in churches to not talk about it because it makes people uncomfortable, especially in a state like Minnesota where it's so predominantly white. But that easier path is just what perpetuates the problem of racism and makes it possible to be in worship with people who are carrying beliefs that are antithetical to God, you know? So race in the church has been an area of passion for me since I started ministry in 2002, and even more so having adopted daughters from Africa.
Wow, wow. So the thing that all of you guys are saying, which I guess is we can kind of start the conversation. Well, first, let me say, anybody who is watching this, if you know somebody who might need to hear the conversation that we're having or anything like that, please like and share this page. We want to kind of get this message out to as many people as possible. But one thing that you guys are saying that is a little bit, I guess you can say, surprising to me in a way, and I'm interested to hear David's perspective on this, is that I didn't fully realize how much racism was in the church. So it sounds like Tim and Misty have some personal experiences with that goes way back. Peter, you kind of expressing that you have some experience with that also. And I'm not sure where you are, David, because I know with the conversation that we had, you have been going to mostly a predominantly black church. But I personally did not realize the extent to which racism was in the church until George Floyd's death. And so it just kind of exploded from there. So if you guys can kind of talk about your own personal experience, and Misty, you kind of explained a little bit, and you can expound on that if you want to. What kind of experiences with racism have you had in the church or have you seen in the church?
David, I'm sorry, I'll go and I'll let you go. For me personally, I would say, especially before we moved up here, I won't name the church because it doesn't matter, but more things very specific, like, if you're white, you're going to heaven. If you're black, you are not. You stand outside of God. You stand outside this group of people who God has chosen, which are not black and brown folks. So those are some more specific things. Since we've been here, I wouldn't say I don't even know that it's not the message, but there are people at church who are very specific, probably more politically specific. If you voted for this person, you're for sure not going to heaven because that's just unacceptable to God. Right. I would say after the death of George Floyd, again, like you've said, almost saying it without really saying it. Like, he's a criminal. This is what he deserved. No, he's a human being. He has a soul, and no human being should die like that. And as Christians, we should be praying for his soul and his family to grieve. That's what we should be doing. But that message isn't shared by all, or even expressed by all, or recognizing that, there's not very many black people at the church I go to. I'm one of a few, recognizing that this black female is hurting and maybe we need to come alongside rather than just staring at me and waiting for me to fall apart.
I think it's the kind of racism that I've seen in the church is more subtle and goes along with what you're saying about voting. I find it very, very appalling that you went to a church where people actually said, if you're not white, you don't go to heaven. Like, oh my goodness. Like, it's pretty shocking. And so, Tim, I'm really interested in your point of view, especially being somebody who is not of color. What kind of racism have you seen in the church?
Yeah, so this church that Misty's talking about is a church that I was born into. So it was kind of growing up not knowing anything different. So I didn't know anything. That was the church my parents grew up in. It was the church I was born into. It's a church that I went to until I was 35 years old. So I knew nothing different. And so I thought they were right because my parents told me it was right. And when you're a kid, you believe what your parents and what the pastor from the pulpit is saying. And while they didn't come out and explicitly say, black people are going to hell, they believe the whole mantra that, of Noah's sons, one was cursed and he was the black one. And, they were very exclusive, and and that's the part that was really racist, that I didn't recognize until I had some separation, but exclusive in the sense that if you didn't look like them, talk like them, dress like them, act like them, you weren't really saved. They took the whole idea of, a tree by its fruits, as by these outward manifestations of how people acted and how people looked. And you couldn't come and take communion if you didn't like act a certain way and dress a certain way and do a certain thing. And so until we had some separation, both time and distance, from that church, it was really hard for me to even recognize that it existed, because I was so immersed in it. And so it was really challenging for me to leave, and to even say it out loud today that it was cult-like is a little bit challenging for me, even though it is. They kept people there by fear, saying that if you leave this church, it's the only place, we have the quote unquote truth and nobody else does. So, I always question that, because I always wonder, there's other churches that say the same thing and they believe something different. So how can you have, 4 or 5 different churches that believe they're the only ones that are right, and yet they're all different? But it was really almost impossible to recognize that until we had some space and distance. And I would say even after we moved away, I didn't really recognize it until probably, George Floyd was killed. Like, that was kind of the eye-opening part for me, to start to recognize that, this is the churches we go to are essentially a European view of what church is and how church should be. And maybe there's other ways that we could be Christian. I don't think that, Jesus gathered in a pew and listened to somebody talk at him, and that was his version of Christianity. So like, just starting to think about that more recently, and that makes it really challenging for me to find a church that I think is, I don't know, a good one to go to. I'm looking for that community, but really struggling to find it.
Wow. So, I mean, I even have some questions in my mind for you from like a black person's perspective, because I hear a lot of whites say things like, if you grow up in American culture, it's almost impossible for you not to be racist, because you are indoctrinated with so many direct and indirect messages that white is the superior race, that I'm curious as to how you didn't turn out to be racist. I mean, if you can kind of explain that a little bit, I would be interested in getting a little bit of insight on that, if you want to explain it.
Well, it's funny you should ask. I didn't turn out to be not racist. So, well, maybe I was not racist. That's what I thought I was. Like, I wasn't like, somebody who used racial slurs or that sort of thing. But and like, looking back, I was racist. I didn't defend my wife. I didn't talk about those things. We didn't discuss race. We just ignored it, basically, is what I did. And so in that sense, like, I don't find myself to be any less racist than any other people that I went to church with. I just probably didn't talk about it as much as they did, and was never in a, like a leadership position in the church or anything like that. So didn't have like the platform to really talk about, being racist in an out loud sort of way. And so I think that, again, maybe in the last year and a half or so is when I've actually done lots of, looking back on my life and introspection, to recognize that a lot of these things that I have been doing are actually racist, and had to really come to terms with myself and recognizing that these are things that, in my past that maybe I'm not so proud of anymore, that I've thought about, and recognize that, I'm just as racist as all the other people that I went to church with. And so I can do something about that, though I don't have to continue living that way.
Wow. That's really, really powerful. Wow, I'm kind of speechless. I mean, that must be a hard thing to kind of come to terms with, and even realizing yourself. And I think a lot of one of the main reasons why racism is still so prevalent is because I believe a lot of whites, I'm not white, but I'm just, using an example, have a very hard time coming to that realization of themselves that, yes, this is not right. And yes, I am a little bit racist, or a lot racist, or whatever, and that I actually need to make some changes. And so I really respect you for that. And although blacks, we have our hands full with our own issues, I understand that could not be an easy journey for you also. So I do thank you for sharing that. So David, we talked about, you on the phone, we talked about kind of your experience with racism, and you expressed to me that you've been in a predominantly black church. So what kinds of ways do you think you've seen or experienced racism in the church, or the way that racism has affected the black church? If you can kind of share that a little bit.
I thought I'd try that again, but can you hear me now? You hear me? Okay, great. All right, so I wish I can say that I am surprised to hear Tim's testimony, but I'm not surprised to hear it. I'm not surprised to hear it, especially in our nation. It saddens my heart because I know that there are ministries such as, and I'm not bashing any ministry. It's not my place to bash any ministry. But to know that such ministries exist and organizations in our nation exists, and know that people are hurt and people have been hurt by such things like that. And I don't think the church should turn a blind eye. I don't think the church should try to justify it. I think we should do what we're doing now and bring what the scriptures talked about, that balm of Gilead, and so we can meet the needs of our people. So I do. I grew up in church my whole life. I've been predominantly in all black. I fellowship with other white, Spanish, different type of races and stuff like that. I have to say out the gate, I've never experienced racism within the church myself. Right. Outside the church, that's a different story. But inside the church, I have not. So because of the last year, I just look at last year, 2020, as God just unveiling some stuff, and he's causing us to confront some things. That's the way that I see it. I know a lot of people have different perspective when they look at 2020. For me, he unveiled a lot, and he's forcing us to confront some things, and we got to talk about it. Just like our nation have to talk about that elephant that's in the room. So I've talked to a few, white brothers that are in the faith, may have a different perspective on how they see God. Their theology may be a little different. But what I've come to learn just from my dialogue with them, that we can use the same terminology, but have a different meaning while we're using the same word. So we're talking, having a conversation, and we're saying the same words, but in my mind, I'm meaning one thing, while in their mind, they're thinking something else. For example, when we talk about racism, the average, and I can't speak for every black person, but the average black person, I would say, will automatically think in this nation, institutional and structural type of racism. We're not just talking about like back in the past, it's individual. And then so the average white person, they have the mindset of individualism. So they think because of like that, they themselves, that individual, haven't done anything that was racist, and they haven't really seen it themselves, that there is none, because we hear that. And personally, as I engage with different people, I feel like we are in some type of Twilight Zone episode, because we see something happening, but then a lot of people is telling you it's not happening. It's not happening. So I think it's a lot of mixed messages. Even within the black community in church, different people have different ways in which they want to look at it and how they want to approach it. Most people just want to, brush it under the rug. Well, I'm not going to say most. Some people want to brush it under the rug. Let's forget about it and let's just, move on, that type of thing. But there are some people who can't because they're hurt. And unfortunately, stuff like this is considered as church hurt. We got so many different, because I've seen that even amongst my own people. I really hate saying it like that, especially from a kingdom perspective, because we know that, all of us are really family in Christ. So I understand that. But if you're just talking from a practical sense, from the black, perspective, everybody has different ways of how they approach and how they see and how they feel, because everybody's upbringing is different. For myself, I've been, if I could just be honest and open, I've been brought up in a hood. I come from Southeast DC, and it's not all that kosher. So when I was coming up as a young kid, it's a little different now. It's getting a little mixed right now. It's gentrified and all that stuff or whatever. But when I was coming up, it's mainly all black, and I was around black, and I sing black. You know what I mean? That's all I was kind of like used to for the most part. And what I've seen is the you can see the discord. I would say that you can see the discord. You can see the relations of the average black person with the policeman or something. You can see the relation with the average black person with a business person is white and stuff. You can just tell. And I'm gonna share this because I don't want to talk too much, but I used to do Uber on the side, right? And when I'm driving Uber, I have so many different people that comes in, and we talk about so many different things. I mean, and they will bring up so many different things. They bring up gentrification, they bring up racism, they bring up all types of stuff that you could talk about. And so I had a few conversations where, they asked me, so how do you feel about the gentrification? What do you feel about it? And I shared my heart and what I felt about it. And basically what I was saying, I said, you know what? One of the main things that I don't like is that the fact that, for a long time, the Black community have been asking the government or asking the mayor to infiltrate, put money into the schools, put money into this, and help build stuff up so that we all can benefit from it. But we never really got it. And then when it became gentrified, all of a sudden, all this money started coming in, the schools have been built up, and, but the only thing about it, it only benefit those that have the money that can stay in. What I'm seeing is a lot of the minorities are being kicked out, not just Blacks. I had some Hispanic people in the, while I'm driving around, and they themselves are telling me where they're being pushed out to because they can't afford staying in the area. And so what it looks like is that there is this, and nobody's really talking about it. Everybody knows what gentrification is and what happens, but you can see that there is this discord and this separation. So what I've noticed is like two realities going on. You can see a bunch of, I'm talking about it because it is a reality. The reason I'm bringing it up is because it's a reality. But at the same time, it's I know from a kingdom perspective, it's a sad thing. So you got two realities. You got a bunch of young, educated, white, people just come from school or finish the school, they're raising their family and all that type of stuff. And you can tell they are living life on purpose. But then you see this other reality right there on the street, right before them. And you got a lot of minorities just walking around as if they are zombies, as if they have no purpose. And I'm not saying that so that, we can feel sorry and all that crap. I'm just saying, look, let's just observe and let's see what's going on. This whole dynamic of racism or this whole dynamic of biases, it really goes deeper than the surface of what we see. This is like a dual reality that is going on right before our eyes. So it's like, okay, as the church, what are we to do about it? What can we do? When Christ came, he was gravitated to those that were hurt, those that were sick, those that were marginalized. He gravitated to those. In fact, it says that he didn't come for those that were well, those that was, those that had it together. He actually came for those that were literally hurt. And what I see a lot of what the church is doing, we're justifying why a lot of minorities are in the predicament in which we are in. You know what I mean? So I'm like, instead of justifying, let's find a remedy.
Wow. Yeah, I thought one thing that you said that I sounded is interesting to me is I have been in Black churches, and that's the thing. I grew up in the hood too, but I've also, like, more of my adult life been in the suburbs, so I have the experience of both worlds. I went to predominantly Black church, and I have went to predominantly white church, and so I have had an opportunity to see them on both ends of the spectrum. And I think what sounds really kind of interesting to me is that even within the Black church, that you would think that maybe that racism wouldn't touch it. Like you say, you didn't experience racism in the church, but the fact that there is a divide and you have some Blacks that are saying, let's just ignore it and not, let's just forget about it. And then you have those who are hurt. It's still creating a dynamic. Like, racism is still affecting the Black church, even though it might not be directly in the church. And so that's another thing that I think is really important to point out, because racism does not stay contained within its own world. It stretches out into different communities. And basically, like what you were saying, it's not just on the surface. Like, you have to really get down to the mentality of what people are actually going through that are brought up in this society that has systemic racism, how it kind of puts them on a particular path without them even understanding exactly why they're on that path or what to do about it. So I just wanted to kind of point that out with what you were saying. But Peter, you talked about, you're having a passion for, addressing racism in the church before you even started pastoring. Can you talk a little bit about some of the racism that you have seen within the church, even if it was before you became a pastor?
Yeah, I have run into two kinds of racism in the church. So my church has a lot of working class folks, and I find that racism among the working class tends to be more overt. Like, people who get offended when you bring up issues of race, who stand up and walk out, who we had a woman who took care of kids during our recovery meetings, and she wound up taking care of kids during a life group, and her son wound up dating a girl, and the girl was black. And she mentioned during a life group, like, how those people are. And my friends who are African American in the group are like, what? Like, she's taking care of our kids, right? And so occasionally I'll run into overt racism, especially from people who are more working class, where it's not as hidden, where it's not something that you just understand but don't talk about. And then the other kind of racism you run to a lot more often is people whose racism, number one, they might not be aware of it. Number two, it just might be the culture that they're swimming in. And examples of that would be, I got so many people in my church who are up in arms about critical race theory. They don't even know what it is. They have no idea what critical race theory is. They hear about it on the news and they're all super against it. I wrote on critical race theory, it's like 90% awesome.
The connection is. 1 second, Peter. Are you guys having trouble hearing Peter? Because I'm kind of having trouble hearing Peter too. Can your screen here is getting kind of foggy, like I can't see you as well. Maybe your connection is going a little bit bad. But if you want to kind of maybe start where you were saying, go back a couple sentences and start over, because that's where the connection starts to get choppy.
So, can you guys take a comment if you're able to hear me, if the connection's poor?
No, it's really,
Stage right now.
it's really choppy. Yeah, I'm even having a difficult time understanding 5 words now. So maybe let's try to. Yeah, he's saying that I have some people in the comments saying that this reception is kind of acting up a little bit. I'm not sure what to do about it actually. So let me think. Are all you guys just Tim and everybody else? Is everybody looking choppy to you, or is it just Peter?
It's both of you.
Yeah, so it's both you, Sage, and Peter.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm not sure what to do about it. Let me try to check my. Okay, Peter. It seems like he's saying everybody's choppy again. Oh my goodness. I'm not sure what to do. Try going. Okay. Okay. So I have a suggestion for my. He said try to restart the broadcast. You guys don't go anywhere. I'm just gonna try to restart it, and hopefully that will fix the problem. So let me stop this for a second.